Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. First question. Hi Jason, your thoughts on elevated heels when squatting? Omar Surfcom recently did a video on it in relation to lifting shoes. Uh, I've never had any trouble hitting depth, but gave it a go and felt a lot smoother. Kinder on my back, but my knees click like a mofo. Any advantages/disadvantages? No, I think squatting shoes are fantastic overall for high bar squatters, also known as Olympic squatters. Not necessarily for low bar. Low bar, that's going to be a point of contention. A lot of people are going to debate that, but I think because of the wider stance, it might not be ideal for your knee joints. So if you're hearing the clicking in your knees, I don't know if it's just the new mobility you're getting used to it and the fluid in there popping, or if it's an issue because you're doing a serious low bar squat. But what I would recommend to you is that if you are going to try it with a low bar squat, use a very non-aggressive shoe. Like for me, you guys, if you recall when I was squatting, and I still have my squat shoes, I used Adidas Adi Powers. They have a fairly aggressive heel as far as the height of the heel goes. There are other shoes that have a less aggressive heel, such as like the Adidas weightlifting shoes actually have a less aggressive heel. Start with a less aggressive one, because I would be concerned about the knees a little bit with doing that, so it could be a concern. But I think overall, as far as reaching depth, hip mobility, everything else, elevated heeled shoes are a must, but they need to be proper shoes. Don't just do something half-ass or jerry rig something, because you really need a shoe that's properly designed for it, that's stable, that's not going to shift or move under a heavy load, which is also why people who put plates under their heels are complete idiots, or a board under their heel, because they're doing something that's not stable just to get that extra depth. And so a lot of bodybuilders and stuff do that because they don't seem to understand there are shoes made specifically for this, and it's not a good idea to do something else, because if that plate shifts or moves or something goes wrong, you're going to potentially injure yourself, and getting set up can potentially injure you as well. So please remember, when we talk about the elevated heel thing, we're not talking about standing on something. We're talking about using shoes with a hard heel built in that's designed to stay together and not be damaged when under load. And a good pair of shoes is worthwhile if you're going to do this. So please, guys, don't stand on plates or on blocks. It's just really stupid to do that, and you run the risk of hurting yourself for minimal benefit. But a good pair of shoes, yeah, absolutely, will make a world of difference. It's one of the few lifting devices I do recommend, because you guys notice I don't even train with a belt. So yeah, I think it's fine. Just again, if you're going to low bar squat, use the least aggressive heel you can find. And plenty of guys low bar squat just fine in chucks, and have for many, many years. So may not be as necessary for that style of squat. All right, next question. Are box squats a suitable alternative to regular squats to develop strength/power? I don't compete in powerlifting, so is there a need to practice getting out of the hole? The box is set to allow a knee flexion slightly greater than 90 degrees, and I find the slight pause on the box great for initiating an upward drive while maintaining solid form. Yeah, box squats are fine for that. I tend to advocate the high bar squat for most people, because I feel it gives better overall athleticism, and because it allows you to train the stretch reflex, the myotatic reflex, and you can't get that as well on the box squat. But if you're simply uncomfortable with a standard squat and you're choosing to use a box squat for whatever reason, yeah, it's perfectly fine, other than, again, it requires extra work to set up a box. You have to have access to a box, everything else. And there is a risk of injury involved with it. What you need to be aware of when you do the box squat, make sure that you don't ever hit the box hard. And that's one of the downsides of it, is that it does add an extra risk component. And oftentimes people do it because they just simply are uncomfortable squatting without a box. It's that fear of falling back, and a lot of people struggle to get over that. But as far as the squat itself being a good exercise, yeah, the box squat's fantastic. It's been a mainstay for many strength athletes over the years, including competitive powerlifters. And if that's what you choose to do, and that's what you enjoy doing, I would rather see you doing that than not doing a heavy squat at all. So definitely keep doing it. No problem with it there. Just again, be aware of the risk of injury by hitting the box too hard. You need to remember to make a soft touch to the box and then sit back. and then come back up through the heels instead of hitting the box hard. And just always be aware that when you go with a heavy weight, sometimes there's always that risk you're going to hit that box harder. So that being said, it would be in your best interest too, when you start using a modestly heavy weight, is you probably need to put pads on top of that box, which means you're going to need an even lower box to get on so those pads can compress, and that will also make it a safer exercise for you. Another little pro tip, make sure that you're turning the box at a diagonal so the point goes between your feet. It's going to give you a lot more safe contact with the box when you come down, because the box will be further under you and then your legs clear it easier. So just a couple tips with it. So hopefully that answered your questions. All right, next question. Hey Jason, you discussed in your Tracy Anderson video that running isn't really all that good for your knee joints. For the general population who do choose to run for cardio, would you advise them to incorporate leg training into their routine in order to strengthen the joints and decrease the risk of long-term damage? Thanks. Well, I would hope they're already doing leg training with weights, because if they don't, they're missing out all the health benefits of strength training, which actually has more total health benefits than the running does. So I would really hope that they are. But to answer the question, yes, they do need to incorporate leg training, and because they're doing a lot of running, they need to make sure that they don't develop, number one, quad dominance, and number two, they need to make sure that they keep their knee joint more stable. So the best thing they could be doing is not only obviously doing exercises for the quads like the squat or leg press, preferably the squat, but they need to make sure that they're putting a lot of emphasis on their posterior chain. So a lot of deadlifts, glute ham raises, things like that. They need to make sure that they're putting a very strong emphasis there, because the best thing that they can do to avoid injury as far as their weight training goes is going to make sure that they do not become quad dominant. So posterior chain, so glutes and hamstrings become an enormous priority, particularly those hamstrings, because if they do that, they're going to have a much more stable knee joint. They're going to have a more secure knee joint, and they're less likely to damage their knees doing the running. And you combine a lot of good solid hamstring hypertrophy work and strength work combined with picking really good shoes, the proper shoes for running, and their chances of having a knee injury go down dramatically, and it makes it a much, much safer way to train. All right, next question. Hi Jason, please tell me what you consider the best tricep isolation exercise with the least impact on the joints and how to execute it safely. It's not comfortable for me to do dips. Thanks. Well, you need to keep in mind you might not need to isolate the triceps. If you're doing closed grip presses and overhead presses, your triceps might be pretty well covered for most people's purposes. But if you feel that you need a tricep exercise and you're concerned about tendinitis, again, inflammation in the connective tissue around the elbow where the triceps insert, or elbow inflammation, the best exercise that I can possibly recommend would be dumbbell skull crushers, but with two things to keep in mind. Number one, you need to keep your hands in a fully pronated position, which means your palms facing each other. So you think of it as a hammer grip. So again, skull crushers laying down, and you need to make sure that you bring the dumbbells all the way back behind your head on every rep, so that you have extension of the shoulder as you go, so that you're not just moving the elbows. So the main thing you're looking at is to make sure that when your elbows are fully bent and the dumbbells are down, that the dumbbells are behind your head, because it's that position to where when you have laying down, your upper arm is 90 degrees from the floor, meaning the upper arm, meaning the part where the tricep and the bicep are. When that's 90 degrees from the floor, or from your body, and you have full flexion of the elbow happening there, the elbow is fully bent, that's what actually causes the inflammation on that connective tissue there. So you need to avoid that. So again, that exercise done that way is the one exercise I can think of that is the least negative impact on your connective tissue or elbow joint itself as far as any single isolation movement goes for the triceps. So give that a try. All right, next question. If you skip a day of training, is it optimal to continue with progression or simply move on? For example, you were meant to hit a 65% intensity deadlift. Should you skip and continue up to 70% or complete the 65% set? All right, you need to look at it this way. If you're on any given program and you're scheduled to hit certain exercises in a certain sequence, you need to do them in that same sequence. Meaning, if you had a program that has you run from workout to workout, a 60% intensity, 65%, 70, 75, 80, going over on different workouts, you don't want to skip. If anything, all you did by missing a workout is give yourself a little bit more recovery time, a little more time to adapt, so you're more likely to be successful on the next lift unless you went so long that you detrained. Now, if it required you to take 2 weeks away from an exercise, you're going to regress. But if you were doing this Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you hit your Monday, you miss your Wednesday, you need to do your Wednesday workout on Friday. And you just need to chalk it up to a loss and just pick up the schedule where you left off due to the missed day. Don't skip days in a structured program, because if you do, you're going to miss part of the sequence and you're not going to progress the same. So yeah, you need to follow the program as written, and any days that you miss, you need to just move the program forward to actually do the day that you missed on the next workout, and your whole workout itself needs to move forward one whole day. So that's just the way it is. So if you're doing whatever it is, if you're doing a split routine, push pull, or upper lower, you're going to actually have to change your upper lower days in the following weeks until you get it all sorted back out, because ideally you want to follow that same structure if you're running any sort of written periodized program, because it's intended to be run that way, and you're going to actually miss some of the benefits if you skip workouts. So remember, a miss just means that you move that day forward and do that day anyways. All right, next question. I know one can out-train a bad diet in those extreme circumstances, but can someone out-diet a bad diet? Say someone is adamant about eating plenty of vegetables, 9 to 10 servings a day, and then fills out the rest of their calories up with foods like burgers, pizza, pie, and cake. Would they still see the negative health effects of a bad diet? All right, great question. And you know what? That's entirely dependent upon a number of factors. Now, if you're talking about just the empty calorie aspect, that's usually our biggest concern, is that people are eating a lot of low satiety, empty calories without getting all their vitamins, minerals, and satiation, fiber, things like that. Now, if you have someone who's sitting there eating 800 calories of mixed vegetables every day, and then they fill up the rest of their diet with junk when they're trying to lose weight, are they going to successfully lose weight? Yes, absolutely. It's going to be still dictated by their calories. Because they're eating this enormous pile of vegetables, it might even handle the hunger aspects of the low satiety foods. A lot of foods, though, as far as the negative health effects, some of them are caloric dependent, meaning a lot of those bad foods, the negative health effects don't appear when you're in a calorie deficit, or even if you're not gaining weight or gaining body fat at all, a lot of times you don't see a lot of the negative effects. Things like dietary cholesterol, even just refined carbs. No, you're probably going to be okay in regard to that. However, the thing that you need to consider, there are foods that even in a calorie deficit, over time will have some negative effects, and that's going to be stuff like trans fats. So if you're eating a bunch of those foods and you check them and you're eating a significant amount of trans fats, even though you might be dieting and you might be in a small calorie deficit and losing weight, those trans fats themselves over time can become problematic for you. The same thing with excessive fructose intake. It might not manifest initially during that, but things like the potential fatty liver buildup, if you're consuming more than 50 grams of fructose a day, even though you're burning through it and you're eating large amounts of refined fructose or any fructose, you can still develop over time potential fatty liver. It still could affect, insulin resistance, things like that over time. So it is still a concern. So to answer the question, it really depends upon the content of your food. But as far as just there being some refined carbs in there being some extra cholesterol in there, but you're still in a calorie deficit and you're still consuming huge amounts of vegetables, fiber, vitamins, minerals, for the other half of your diet, you're probably going to be okay. But again, if it's a bunch of trans fats or excessive amounts of fructose, you're still going to see some potential negative health benefits, or I'm sorry, not benefits, but health consequences could manifest with chronic intake of it over time. All right, next question and last question of the week. Can you talk about the possible disadvantages of icing injuries and taking anti-inflammatories? Stan Efferding mentioned that they are bad for injury healing since inflammation is necessary and blood flow is important. All right, I'm going to keep this one short and sweet because I'm running out of time. I don't want this to turn into a 20-minute part 2 here. So in short, anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs, we have multiple studies on this in athletes, and if you're training, we'll count you as an athlete. What they have found is that they do not seem to impede injury healing, and they do not inhibit muscle gains or muscle protein synthesis. There was a concern from some early studies that they might, but it turns out that they do not, and so they don't interfere with your gains. But the other question becomes, if you're taking them for injuries, that's one thing. If you're taking NSAIDs because you're getting consistent training pain, you might want to reassess how you're training instead of using a crutch. But injuries, perfectly acceptable. Icing injuries, on the other hand, even though a lot of coaches and people still do it, icing injuries has been found to slow down their recovery. Yeah, that is true because icing an injury restricts blood flow. That restriction of that blood flow will slow down the healing of that injury a bit. So it's not ideal. However, icing of certain injuries is a requirement, meaning if you have an immediate injury that's not going to heal on its own, because let's be honest here, if you tear a muscle, that is probably not going to necessarily just heal on its own. A major tear that requires surgery, you need to ice that sucker immediately. And the same thing with a broken bone. You get a broken bone, you need to ice it. And here's the reason for that. Because your doctor is who's going to have to set everything. If you take that to a doctor and you've brought the swelling down through the icing, because that's what you're doing, you're reducing the swelling. So a swelling injury needs to be iced to get the swelling itself under control. And that will make your doctor's job easier. When he has to go in a couple of days and reattach that tendon, his job's going to be so much easier if the swelling is down. It's going to make it easier, your chances of recovery better. If you've broken a bone, again, getting that swelling under control is going to help the doctor set that bone easier and put a good cast on it easier. It's going to make things easier for you when you get to the doctor, and it's going to make his job easier, and that's going to make your healing easier. But as far as icing injuries that are not swelling, it's a bad idea because it is going to inhibit recovery. So it's kind of not a straightforward yes or no answer. It depends on the specific type of injury and if there's swelling or not, if a doctor is going to have to work on it or not. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. As usual, I'm going to do a part 1 and a part 2, and then an optional part 3, which is going to be a gear talk. So let's go ahead and get this started. First question. Howdy Jason, in block periodization, what's the advantage of doing 3 sets of 8 during a volume block rather than 8 sets of 3? It's the same number of reps, but it allows the use of more weight. Would it be possible to keep the reps at 3 to 5 and varying the number of sets between blocks? Am I misunderstanding block periodization altogether? I'm freaking out here, Jason. Right. Yeah, there's a big difference there because there's a difference in terms of peripheral nervous system loading, power, all of that, and the amount of time it takes. Generally, when you're doing the 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 10, things like that, you are working on metabolic fatigue. It is purely a hypertrophy phase. It's there to thicken you up and get you out of the gym fairly quick so that recovery is fairly quick because, again, you're using a fairly low number of sets with relatively short breaks, 3 minutes or so. So it's fairly short workouts that are there just to induce metabolic fatigue for that phase and get out of the gym. And it's usually only going to be a 3-week block anyway, so it's not a big deal. When you switch over to things like 8 or 10 sets of 3 with a slightly heavier weight, you're in the gym longer, you're fatiguing the peripheral nervous system more. Those are more of what we call accumulation phases, or they're going to be dynamic effort phases because you might actually be using a lighter weight than you would for the 8 rep sets if you're doing it purely for speed, strength, and power in a block. So again, you can have dynamic effort type blocks also running that same format. But if you're talking about doing it with a heavier weight, you're going to be in the gym longer. It's going to be harder to recover from. And again, we would generally call that accumulation training. And you don't want to do that for long periods of time because, again, you're going to stall out and it is more difficult to recover from, requires twice as long in the gym, etc., as what you're doing with the lower sets with a slightly lighter weight. So again, it's about balancing these things, and that's the whole point. With block periodization, you run through different performance elements and you max them out over a 3-week period as much as you can squeeze out of that one. Then you switch to the next performance element and hopefully minimize detraining of those. And they always detrain a little bit, but the whole idea is to enforce progressive overload over time through the different performance elements by running them out for their 3 weeks until you get through the law of adaptations, and you start stalling out again. And that's the whole idea, is to prevent stalling and to have a continual, at least small amount of overload building over the weeks and months. And that's the whole idea. So they're very, very different, and please don't mix them up. You need to understand the difference and the different recovery curves and adaptations to the different block periodizations. Again, if you want to understand some of this better, go read books like Super Training, Practical Programming. There's plenty of other books out there that you can read on these topics. All right, next question. Mad cows 5x5 during recomp and slow cutting? If not, what would you suggest? I lost around 25 pounds on my squat since I started losing weight earlier this year. I was doing the Texas method, but pretty inconsistently. However, I went from 190 to 170 pounds. I'm 5'8", so that's not too light, which means I didn't lose much relative strength. What is the best way to keep as much muscle as possible? I'm an intermediate. My max 1 reps are 385 squat, 240 bench, 405 deadlift. Never tested my deadlift max. I extrapolate from a 5 rep max. Hey brother, the reason that you lost strength is probably because you cut too fast. You might be calling it a slow cut, but 20 pounds of body weight loss in any significant period of time, like if that's only in a few months, that's not really a slow cut. If you're losing a pound every week, that is not a slow cut. So even at 20 weeks, 5 months, that's a fairly fast cut for someone who isn't overweight or obese really. So that's the whole difference. You probably weren't fat with a gut and out of shape when you started that cut, in which case you just cut way too fast. A slow cut would be something like a pound or two a month at the most. That's a slow cut for someone who's already at a healthy body fat percentage. You simply cut too fast and you probably lost a little bit of muscle and you lost some strength. If you want to regain that strength, you need to go back on a very slow, very clean bulk. You're definitely not doing a slow cut or a recomp though, again, unless it took you a year or more to lose that 20 pounds. But again, that's a slow cut. As far as what you're doing for programming, MagCal's 5x5 is perfectly acceptable for what you're doing, but you're going to have to accept that you're going to have to cut slower than than you're doing. The reason you see guys who cut 20 pounds in a few months' time and get fairly ripped and they seem to maintain almost all of their strength doing it is generally a hefty dose of drugs involved. People who aren't on drugs don't lose weight that quickly while maintaining their strength. So again, you've got to remember, slow cutting for a drug-free lifter versus slow cutting for a heavily enhanced lifter are going to be totally different animals. You just can't lose 20 pounds of body weight as a drug-free lifter in a fairly short period of time. Again, anything well under a year, and expect to maintain all of your strength or gain any strength at all. It's just not going to happen. Which also raises the point of, if you're really concerned with your body fat percentage, then you probably don't need to bulk to the point to where you want to lose 20 pounds of body fat. That's probably the biggest mistake you're going to be making as a drug-free lifter, to actually find yourself in a position to where you want to lose 20 or more pounds of body fat. Again, not ideal. You probably need to be bulking a little slower if body composition is a big deal for you. So there you have it. All right, next question. Best lower body exercises for when you want more leg and hip volume, but your spine and central nervous system have had enough of heavy squats and deads. Reverse lunges, Bulgarian squats, single leg, Romania deadlifts, etc. seem to be promoted by reputable people, but could they just be trying to stand out in the fitness field? Yeah, this is a case of they're just trying to stand out. There's nothing wrong with those exercises. They're just a little bit on the exotic side, and they might have some extra risks involved that you don't need to necessarily take by doing all the unilateral work, and that's something you have to assess for yourself. But I think this is very much a case that these people are just trying to stand out and do something different. Honestly, like with anything else, just stick to the basics unless you have a reason to do otherwise. If your spine can only take so much workload, you can only take so much volume, and you're struggling to recover from it, but you want to add more volume for your leg training, and you're doing so purely for leg hypertrophy because it's not going to necessarily be ideal for your power. It's very simple. Leg presses on a slide and glute ham raises. That's all you should need. Again, those completely remove the load from your spine, and they allow you to do more direct leg work, both quad, glute, hamstring. Everything you need is there. In fact, the glute ham raise is probably a superior overall hamstring developer just as in general. Fantastic exercise. So you really only need those two to go to for what you're talking about doing. The other stuff people are trying to do, they're trying to maintain a more functional pattern, I suppose, by incorporating a lot of, again, standing work while they're doing this. But again, if you're already so fatigued with your lower back, core, everything else from all the heavy squats and deadlifts, you don't really need more of these functional movement patterns anymore to get additional just purely leg development. You could do that off of the leg press and the glute ham raise just fine. So again, I think people are overcomplicating it, and they're doing something different just so that they can stand out and look special. All right, next question. Can somebody who trains Muay Thai casually 3 times per week, 6 hours total, gain size for aesthetics and strength, or is that an unrealistic goal? Is it best to train weights in the morning and then Muay Thai in the evenings? or to allow more rest days, or to split them up. Goal is to train both Muay Thai and lifting 3 times a week each, assuming the trainee knows enough to stimulate muscle growth without recovery getting in the way. Will this regimen lead to quicker overtraining plateaus? Thanks. All right, the fact that you're trying to serve 2 masters means that your training needs to be a little more balanced. What you need to focus on is a couple of things here. Number one is going to be recovery and adaptation to each one. Your training sessions need to be 24 hours apart so that you get most of the muscle growth from the actual lifting before you ease over into the training adaptation from the Muay Thai, because again, you're training a couple different components here at a fairly high frequency. Now, the thing you need to remember is that regulating your training volume is going to be the most important thing here. And here's something that people overlook. They need to understand that sometimes training volume gives you a little more muscle mass, but it also does so through extending the growth window a little bit. Normally, your growth window ranges from 28 up to about 48 hours after you perform exercises. That's your maximum growth window. However, how much trauma and damage you cause to the muscle tissue will limit the early parts of the growth window. So what you need to do in order to maximize the muscle gains that you're going to make and the strength that you're going to make from the weight training, you need to cut that volume down, and you need to understand that your volume and conditioning and everything else is coming from those 2-hour Muay Thai sessions. You don't need to worry about work capacity and volume in your weightlifting at this point. That is being handled by the Muay Thai on separate days. What you need to do is to come in and maximize workload in fairly short periods of time, low volume, low set training. You could use concurrent style periodization if you want, or linear, or block, or whatever you want to use to do this depending on your experience level. But on your 3-day-a-week training, you need to limit the total training volume. I would make sure that you're out of the gym in less than an hour, and don't come in and do crazy stuff like 10 sets per body part or anything excessive, because that's going to interfere with your recovery for minimal gains in muscle mass. And in fact, because your recovery gets messed with and it's extending out the recovery time after each training session to do that, it's going to give you a smaller growth window before you get cross-training interference from all the Muay Thai training. So again, you need to limit volume. Short, efficient, moderately heavy workouts are going to be the way to go to put on size on those off days, and they need to be done on different days. So you need to split them up. So if you're weight training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, your Muay Thai needs to be Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday, something like that. That's the best way to approach this. That's the best way to avoid overtraining and while still gaining muscle mass and strength like you're trying to do while doing all this conditioning and everything else for the Muay Thai. Again, separating them by 24 hours is the best thing you can possibly do. And remember, the focus of your weight training is to gain size and strength, not conditioning. So you need to keep that in mind. You're already doing conditioning work on the other days. Limit your volume. You need to focus on the actual strength components in order to get stronger and particularly bigger from the weight training. Use it for what it is, because you're now cross-training with multiple different training stimulus, and so you need to keep that in mind. You need to make sure that you're not interfering with each other and training one excessively in a way that's going to harm your overall progress. And that's how you do that. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I have recently been getting some soreness in my elbows and I'm not sure exactly what's causing it. I do full body 3 days a week, squats, overhead press, weighted neutral grip chin-ups, bench press, and deadlifts. I do all my pressing, pulling, closed grip with a pause at the bottom as you recommend. I sometimes flare my elbows at the top of the range of motion on my presses when using a heavier weight. Could this be causing it? I run a tile installation business which often involves pressing tiles into place for hours a day. Could it just be overuse? Please help. All right, brother, you've got a lot of things going on here in the post. As far as the flaring your elbows near the top of a lockout on any of your presses, that's perfectly acceptable. That's not your problem here. I suspect you're having an issue with just excessive strain on your tricep tendons due to your pressing job in addition to all the pressing, heavy pressing 3 days a week. Now, this is something that you can work around, and the upside of it is you're probably getting some decent tricep development from your actual company you run and the work you're doing there. That's probably actually helping with your tricep strength and development, but it's also contributing to you having excessive inflammation in there and excessive workload on those triceps and connective tissue and joints. So the best thing you can do is you need to go ahead every time you start getting sore in your triceps, I want you to deload all your upper body exercises. And I don't mean just the pressing. I want you to deload the pull-ups. I want you to deload the bench press and the overhead press. All of those are going to need to deload a bit. And the reason for that is that that's what's contributing to it further. Your body will adapt to the workload of the job you do pretty easy. It's the excessive overreaching on the pressing in combination with it that's going to cause you to have that inflammation. So the best way to avoid that is to do some deloads. And you know what? You're not going to gain less muscle or size from doing the deloads with what you're doing, because you have a physically demanding manual labor job that is actually stimulating all those muscles till to some extent. And you can't really afford to deload your actual manual labor, because this is your company you run, this is your income, this is your livelihood. So you need to deload on the weight training side. And like I said, because you're already getting sufficient stimulation, more frequent deloads on your upper body exercises to keep those tendons and everything healthy and recovered actually isn't going to harm your progress at all. It's not going to harm it at all. You're going to do just fine. So don't be afraid of those deloads. And even if that means every third or fourth week you're having to deload your upper body stuff just to keep the inflammation down, that's okay. It's going to work out for you in the end. You don't need to be afraid of those deloads for that. And a lot of guys get afraid of those frequent deloads when they're trying to cross train different things, or training for a couple different things at one time, or they have a manual labor job that's very intensive. They get scared that they're going to lose muscle because of those deloads. But the truth is, the other training stimulus is still actually helping them to some extent with their goals. As far as what they're trying to do. And in your case, the upper body development and tricep work from pressing all those tiles in for hours a day is actually doing very low volume, high rep workload metabolic fatigue work for your triceps and chest and everything else. So they're still going to develop even from that a little bit. And you know what? They're going to keep growing and developing even during those deload weeks, believe it or not. So at the end of those deload weeks, once you come back and your elbows and tendons feel better, you're probably going to be a little bit stronger. You're going to be a little bit bigger after each one. So don't be afraid to take as many of them as you need without worrying about it. And, if you have to, you can also not deload as frequently on the chin-ups, because again, you're getting a lot of tricep and chest involvement from all that, the volume of manual labor that you're doing with your work. So it may not, you may not have to deload it as often, but definitely every single time you start getting that soreness in your triceps, I want you to do a deload even up to a full week on all of your pressing movements, all of them, anything that involves your triceps. And you know what? It's going to be okay. You're still going to make just as good a gains from it. And if you do that, though, it's not going to negatively interfere with your labor, your work, and you're going to have a much lower injury rate, and you're going to do better overall. You're going to feel better, and you're going to have better progress as a result of it. So don't be afraid of taking as frequent of a deload as you possibly need to accommodate your actual manual labor and your career. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative. And I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.